This video is about Dr. Wouter Basson, also known as Dr. Death. He was a cardiologist and military officer who gained notoriety for his involvement in South Africa's chemical and biological warfare program during the Apartheid era. Now, his purpose was to create chemical war weapons. Not only that, but he was specifically involved in research on an anti-fertility vaccine that could be administered to black women without them knowing. Now, his research also included developing chemicals that could poison human beings and go undetected post-mortem, and one of their targets was Nelson Mandela. He is also accused of flooding black neighborhoods with mandrakes to try and turn most of the black youth then into addicts instead of freedom fighters. So in 2021, it was discovered that Wouter Basson was still practicing as a doctor in Cape Town's Mediclinic in Durbanville. This is after being struck off the medical register and being prohibited from practicing medicine again.
This is an oath to one's profession. It's the subject of this inquiry. Wouter Basson's role as an apartheid-era weapons head is being probed. In 2000, a complaint was lodged with the Health Professions Council. 5 years later, Basson was asked to respond. In 2007, his ethics inquiry started. His defense says he wasn't afforded a speedy trial.
You cannot, at this stage, some 30 years later, evaluate the conduct of Dr. Basson in a vacuum.
From 1981 until the mid-90s, Basson was the leader of Project Coast, a chemical and biological weapons program set up by the apartheid regime to develop substances that could poison, sterilize or kill South Africa's black citizens.
I asked him, why, Wouter, are you doing this? And he said, I've got one daughter, and one day, and he said, we don't really have any doubt that the black people will take over the country. But one day, when the black people take over the country, and my daughter asked me, Daddy, what did you do to prevent this? My conscience would be clean. And I must admit, that was the psychosis which prevailed.
It was only in the middle of January 2021 that the public made the connection between the Basson practicing medicine at the Durbanville clinic and the Basson who stood trial for his alleged crimes in a drawn-out court case that unfolded from 1999 to 2001. Now, eventually, local and international media caught wind of the news and it triggered anger and outrage among some South Africans. Now, the country's unrest and protest, like the Soweto uprising of June 1976, in which the police killed 23 people and injured more than 4,000 others, including many young school children, proved that the situation was about to get worse in the country. It was under these circumstances that in August 1981, General Constant Viljoen, chief of the South African Defence Force then, authorized with the approval of political leaders a feasibility study for the establishment of a chemical and biological weapons program.
I have nervous breakdowns on all of these issues and many things. We suffered from it, scientists, a lot, I can assure you, and I cannot make this good. But what grieves me is that the people that created this climate is now denying it. Like if you listen to a person like Minister Botha, you would have sworn he was born an ANC member. He never said, total onslaught, communism, that's the enemy. Never. He denies it. And this is what grieves me, Mr. Chairman, that they are ducking their responsibility for what they did.
It was reported that Basson became obsessed with all things fertility related. Now, according to one of his former directors, fertility and the fertility control studies comprised 18% of all the projects. Now, more specifically, he was involved in research on the anti-fertility vaccine that could be administered to black women without them knowing it.
The other brief was, and very, very important one, was to develop a product to curtail the birth rate of the black population in the country.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this? Who asked you to develop this product?
The person that directly instructed us or asked us to do this was Dr. Basson.
Now, most of the research had a common purpose: to develop agents that could poison human beings and go undetected post-mortem. Now, scientists began by working with known toxic substances and tried to develop liquid and powder forms that could be used in weapons, ammunition, and even in everyday items such as drinks, cigarettes, chocolates, and a lot more.
The most scary part of our project was this genetic manipulation of organisms. It is a very powerful tool.
They produce higher quantities of toxins. You need less of the toxin to maim or to kill people, and that the detection of those toxins would be retarded.
So we transferred information from the DNA from one organism, transfer that information to another organism.
You can infect water supplies, and that will take them a bit longer than what is necessary to determine what the actual cause is.
A ton or two of a chemical weapon will kill about 100,000 or 200,000 people. But these toxins we spoke about here, about 3-4 grams, would kill millions of people.
I don't have first-hand experience on the effect on humans, but in laboratory animals it is lethal.
The Project Coast team identified a certain number of targets for elimination, although some scientists are said to have never wanted details of any targets. Now, Dr. Daniel Goosen, who was the managing director of the RRL, told investigators that ANC leaders and communists, especially Joe Slovo, were considered targets for elimination. Now, in addition, the researchers discussed Nelson Mandela, who was in prison at the time, and they tried to devise a way for him to get cancer so that his release from prison would present less of a political problem when the time came.
Can you explain to us, Dr. Basson, why you, in charge of the chemical and biological warfare program, would have to look at security concerns regarding the safety of President Nelson Mandela at that stage, imprisoned by the then government? Why would they come to a chemical and biological warfare person for that?
At that time, we thought that the Russians and the East Germans and the Cubans played a very important role in the ANC's approach. And then the classical weapons of the Russians and the Cubans would also have been made available to the ANC. And therefore, General Malan, with the knowledge of those substances we found in an ANC weapon cache, and if he thought there were some people who were threatening Mr. Mandela's life, they could, for example, bomb the prison, they could have poisoned him, put poison in his soup, for example. But I had to determine which chemical and biological weapons could be used against him, and I had to protect him.
You know, there's a long list of leading figures who were poisoned, whether lethally or otherwise, between 1977 and 1993. And many of these poisonings can be traced back to Basson's research team.
Dr. Basson mentioned, after he had told us a lot about the effects of thallium, if you give just the right dose, you mustn't give too much, but just the right amount, then you can cause what appears to be an outbreak of meningitis or encephalitis. You get similar symptoms. And in so doing, he mentioned in passing that he had given some thallium. We said we had given some thallium to Steve Biko.
Now, Project Coast's other priority was to develop chemical and biological agents for crowd control, and part of the research team was working on producing a substance that could be used as a gas or in ammunition and grenades by police during major protests involving black opposition groups. Now, large quantities of tear gas and other irritants were produced for this purpose. Basson's team tried to develop a sterilant that could be sprayed onto crowds of protesters from a gas cylinder in order to make them temporarily or permanently sterile. Now, another idea they had was to poison water supplies in black neighborhoods with such substances. but the researchers never successfully produced them. Now, after that failed attempt, Basson and his team of scientists came up with another project, weaponizing street drugs. You see, Basson knew that narcotics were widely distributed to the general public, so he was drawn to the idea of creating poisonous drugs that could incapacitate or kill their users. Now, the labs focused their research on cannabis and mandrax, the two most frequently used drugs at the time in the black communities.
I had my doubts about the use of ecstasy as an incapacitant, because I would not like to make any people that I was fighting against happy and contented. I would rather have them disorientated.
Forensic scientist Dr. David Klatzo finds the suggestion laughable that drugs like ecstasy or mandrax could be used to subdue angry people.
How do you deliver it? How do you monitor the dose? How do you make sure that the wind doesn't blow the aerosol? You presumably have to administer it in an aerosol form, presumably in a situation where you've got an unruly crowd. How do you make sure that the wind doesn't blow it away?
We probably produced about 900 kilos of ecstasy for the army in pure crystalline form. We officially had an order of a ton of this material.
How do you make sure that people get sufficient dose to incapacitate them, as opposed to just make them merry?
That ton of material cost the taxpayer around 3 million rands to produce.
Now, in 1989, F.W. de Klerk replaced Botha as president, and unlike his predecessor, he knew that it was time for the apartheid regime to retreat. Now, in the early 1990s, de Klerk announced the unbanning of political movements and the release of ANC leaders from prison. Now, around the same time, Basson met with de Klerk to discuss Project Coast. You see, Basson insisted that its purpose was to produce incapacitant agents and irritants, which were permitted by the Geneva Protocol. You see, de Klerk authorized the continued work on incapacitants and tear gas, but officially, he banned the research on lethal agents and all the poisons that they were using to kill people.
So in my view, he was not a truthful witness, and neither was he somebody who was willing to come forward and talk about what he did. And even when there were revelations about what he actually got up to, it was just not a sense of remorse. I got the feeling when I walked away from the hearing that here you were dealing with somebody who was absolutely amoral.
Now, the doctor officially retired from the armed forces in March 1993, and the government ordered that all stocks of chemical and biological weapons owned by the SANDF and the police be destroyed. Now, after the end of apartheid and the establishment of a new democracy in the country, Basson faced numerous legal challenges related to his activities in Project Coast. Now, in 1999, he was acquitted of charges related to the program, but the verdict was later overturned by the Supreme Court of Appeal, leading to a retrial. In 2013, Basson was found guilty of unprofessional conduct by the Health Professions Council of South Africa. He was struck off the medical register and prohibited from practicing medicine.
When medical doctors are involved in exercises designed to protect their forces and their allies from harm, no doctor-patient relationship exists. This is a particularly dangerous argument. Doctors make decisions and take actions in management and policy positions where they can argue that a direct doctor-patient relationship is absent. But these decisions and actions impact on people.
He's also accused of acting unethically by providing disorientating substances for cross-border kidnappings and making cyanide capsules available for distribution to operatives for use in committing suicide. However, Basson's senior legal counsel Jaap Cilliers argued in November that Basson should be acquitted as the hearing was unfair and unreasonable and the HPCSA had not proved its case.
Even in the absence of a direct doctor-patient relationship. The duties and rules of a doctor include the promotion of health of the general public and not only the individual patient.
Crazy, man. But otherwise, if you enjoyed the video, give us a like. Don't be stingy, it's free. And if you like the content, man, you can subscribe to the page. Yeah, thanks for watching.